The Differently Brained team acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit, and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to all First Nations cultures and their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways, and communities. Let's get into it.
Well, it seems as though you've caught me here in this state of compromise without a proper episode to share with you. Also, hello, my name's Lachlan Rutherford. Welcome to Differently Brained. This is the podcast that you're listening to, and it's the podcast where no brain is the same. As I said, don't have a regular episode scheduled for you this week, but we do have something a little bit different and a little bit special. We are going to delve into the Differently Brained archives that are, as we all know, very deep and very well stocked, to present to you one of our older episodes that seems kind of pertinent at this point in time. And that's because as of when this episode goes up, it'll have been a week since Valentine's Day. I'm of course talking about our episode where we interviewed Kay Kerr about her book, Love and Autism. It's a great interview. The book is absolutely beautiful. If you haven't already, go and read it. And basically, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoy the episode, and catch you next time.
So Kay is an autistic author and journalist hoping to shift perspectives on autism and neurodiversity through her writing. Her debut novel, Please Don't Hug Me, was shortlisted for Book of the Year for Older Children in the Australian Book Industry Awards in 2021 and listed as a notable book by the Children's Book Council of Australia. Her second novel, Social Cue, was also a CBCA notable book and was shortlisted for the Queensland Literary Awards. Through her freelance work, Kay writes about autistic representation, disability, parenting, pop culture, gardening, and feelings. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, we're so excited. You're our first return guest. You're the first person who was like, let's do this again.
Yeah, I feel honoured. Thank you so much.
Of course. As you know from last episode, I am obsessed with you and I will have you on every time you do something new if you would like to.
Make it a weekly occurrence.
Correct. You've got the overshare and now you just need to come and debrief with me on a weekly basis so we can have a chat.
We can do that offline too.
Oh, bless. Can you kick us off by telling us a bit about Love and Autism, the book,
yes,
or the concept, up to you?
The elevator pitch. I haven't actually practiced this, so thank you. So it's a work of narrative nonfiction. So it's interweaving the stories of 5 autistic people and their lives, following them from childhood through to adulthood, at the different stages of their lives, and looking at love in all its forms. So looking at their friendships, relationships, family, special interests, and self-love, which I feel like is the most important part of all of that. And then interspersed with, I guess, some research, some smaller interviews and pieces. I really love that there's some young autistic voices in there. There's an interview with an autistic psychologist, which I'm really proud of. And just, I guess, overall a celebration of autistic life and love and culture in a way that I hope connects with all readers.
It definitely connected with me 100%. I laughed and sobbed my way all the way through this. Like every time I feel like I pieced myself back together and got to like a general level of steady just into emotions, something else would knock me for 6. I'd just be like, that's so beautiful. Oh my God.
I always want to say sorry when if someone says your book made me cry, but I also am like, yes.
No, it was so good. And like I was mentally prepared for it to be excellent because as you know, I liked your previous 2 books and I was really interested to see what you did with a narrative nonfiction, and just the amount of feelings that it gave me was just so lovely. No apology needed at all. I am stoked to have had this experience with this book.
There's something so exciting to me as a writer about working with real stories. I love fiction. Like I feel like these are 2 separate parts of my brain, and this feels like a natural progression from my 2 YA books to working on this, like a sort of full circle with my journalism work as well. But to me, just talking to people about their lives, and especially talking to autistic people about their lives, is like, I can't believe I got to do it and get paid for it. It's what I like to do anyway in my spare time and in my DMs and with my friends. So
Where did the idea to write this book come from?
So around the time when I was publicizing Social Q, I was doing a little bit of like freelance op-ed kind of stuff in the shorter nonfiction space, I guess. And then I was approached by the publisher, Per Macmillan, and my publisher, Alex, about if I were to be interested in doing a nonfiction longer form, what that would look like. And I think there are already, like, I just thought immediately my reaction was like, I'm not going to do it. That's like, there are already these perfect memoirs by autistic people. I thought Clem Basto's Late Bloomer, and then later on down the track, Chloe Hayden's book as well. I just feel like that space is already done. I don't feel like I need to have anything to add. I don't think I have a whole book about my life. But then I thought writing about other people's lives and telling their stories in a way that, because the whole saying of if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, I kind of thought, what if I brought a whole bunch of different stories to the page? What if I showed the variety, but also the ways in which those stories are similar, even though from the outside looking in, perhaps they're not that related. And so that's when I got really excited. And it was definitely a workshopping process, my publisher, about how that would look. And I'd never done a nonfiction book proposal before, so that was all very new territory. And it was like a leap of faith in a way too, because I had to hope that if I sold this book off proposal, that I would then find people who would want to speak to me, which was, nerve-wracking and terrifying.
I can see how that would have been very scary. Yes. That's really interesting, because I talked about it when we took our dog for a walk yesterday, and I was saying, like, I was going to ask you offline, but you just shared it, of like, if someone came to you, or if you pitched the idea to a publisher, or if your agent shopped it around, kind of thing. And that's interesting. I really love that somebody reached out to you, because it makes me so happy that this book exists. And I definitely think that while Clem and Chloe's books are excellent and amazing, this one just hit differently for me.
I think it's like that's why I want to read those. That's why I search for those books, is like you want more and more stories. I found that when I was first diagnosed, that's what I was hungry for, was other people's stories. I wanted to know, like, what are their relationships like? What was their family life like growing up? What was their schooling experiences like? All of those conversations, as you unpick and unpack your experiences and look back and reflect on it through the lens of autism. And I just think so much of what we read and see so often is looking from the outside in. It's like, it's about the behavior, or it's about why somebody, it's about somebody acting in a way, whether it's a meltdown or it's stimming, or the understanding is very outside in. And so I wanted to tell these stories from the inside out, but in a way that is accessible for anybody who wants to pick it up and read them. It's not just for the autistic community. It's not about educating the non-autistic community. It's just for everyone.
Yeah, well, like, as a non-autistic person, it was honestly the amount of empathy that you write with, and then the willingness of these people to tell their stories. It's like I'm being given so much. I guess I don't want to sound purple when I say this. I'm being given this gift of information from yourself and these people, to learn more about autism and neurodivergence. And it's not this sort of like trying to be pitying or anything. It's not clinical. It's just human, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not inspiration porn. It's not exactly a tragedy. It is literally just these people live this life, and this is what they do, and it's just stunning.
It has been such a gift in the vulnerability that the people that I interviewed, the 5 people, particularly Michael, Chloe, Noor, Jess, and Tim, the vulnerability and openness that they brought. And all of that was in the spirit of, these were the parts that were hard for me, and I felt very alone at those times. So maybe by sharing them, they will help other people feel less alone, or they will pave the way for the next generation of autistic people to have an easier time than we had. But then also getting to celebrate, the things that they're really into, and the things that they have achieved, and the lives that they've carved out for themselves in a world that isn't made or designed with them in mind. And they've still, I think, carved these beautiful, successful lives. And I think so much of the time people talk about, that autism as a tragedy narrative is often like, what if my child won't be able to get married? Or like, what if they won't have a career or go to uni? It's like, are those the things that person actually wants? Or are those the things that other people are projecting onto them as the idea of a successful life? Because everybody will have their own idea of what they want out of their life, what makes them happy. And I think if they have carved that out, then that's a successful life.
Absolutely.
Which, speaking of the wonderful people that you got to speak to for this, how did you know who to reach out to and how did you go about getting them, basically?
Yeah, this was the fear and the terror of her because I think I wanted to make sure that it was a good mix of people and experiences, and I wanted it to be a very collaborative approach. Like it wasn't that baseline of I interview you, then I go away and write what I want and you'll be surprised and potentially not happy with the end result, but you agreed to the interview, so therefore it's okay. It was wanting them to feel in control of their story. So my interview style was very gentle, and people shared what they wanted to share, left out the parts they didn't want to share, had full control over the end product, read multiple drafts along the way so that they knew exactly what was going to end up in the page and how it was going to look, interwoven with all the other stories as well. But it was a mix. Like Jess was somebody that I have known since, like, through the writing community since I first got my autism diagnosis. So I got like my first autistic friend. Then another couple of people I had reached out to autism support agencies asking if there was anyone that would be interested in being interviewed. Nor I was a fan of her writing. She writes a lot of incredible stuff for SBS Voices. So I reached out through, because I had written for them as well, through the editor there. Michael was through my publisher, through the producers of Love on the Spectrum. And then like there were other requests that were denied or things that sort of started and then didn't end up coming together. So it was very much this process. And I felt, like I said, like a big, huge responsibility to make sure that these people are supported and protected and their stories are presented in a way that they're comfortable with. But also that meant that the whole time I kind of had this feeling like, well, what if they read the first draft and they hate it and they want to pull out? So it means at the end result, I'm really happy with how comfortable and involved everybody was. But it meant the writing process, until I had that sort of first draft locked away, was kind of like a white knuckle ride a little bit.
Yeah, fair enough. Did that all happen relatively quickly in terms of reaching out and finding all these people, or were you freaking out for a little bit that no one was going to talk to you?
No, the first couple of people were on board pretty quick, and we got the interview process, because it was quite a few interviews over time. So the process, every interview was about probably an hour or under an hour, and then recorded and transcribed, and then collated into their sort of folder. So that probably maybe 3 months of like reaching out to people and then doing initial interviews. And then once I had the initial interviews, I started to piece the beginnings of the book together, the early life and even figuring out how I was going to break up the stories and interweave them was really tricky. So then I would hit a point and go, okay, I need to reconnect with this person. And then I would line up another interview, have a little bit more of a chat, or maybe delve into some things a little bit more deeply that we might have just brushed over quite quickly, and then go away and do some more writing. And, I think somewhere between like 3 and probably 5 or 6 interviews with each person. But then we're on email and, DM, that kind of thing, just chatting it through. Yeah. So it got off the ground pretty quickly, and I felt like it was working, but feeling like it was secure in its form was very late in the game. So last year I had a very stressed out year last year, but I'm really happy with how it's all come together.
I'm surprised that you said that like piecing the stories together and knowing kind of the overall structure was a bit tricky, because it seems so seamless to me. Like you make it look so easy and it flows so naturally that as a writer, I think, yeah, of course it would have been hard. Like you've got all of these different narratives and you're trying to bring them together. But as a reader, it was amazingly done.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. How did you figure that out? How did you get through that process? This is totally just for my own learning.
Yeah, it was just because I wanted the form of the book to feel autistic, which is a strange thing to say, but I wanted it to have that tangential, here's a little offshoot that's going to explain this little thing, and then here's a little aside about this, and then here's a little breakout about this, and I'm going to give you a little rest on this page with some dot points. And so that had to be like fully pantsed, I guess you would say, just like in the moment as I was writing, what was I thinking about? And sometimes I would leave like a note, like explain this, this term or this look into the, you know, the history of this here and then go back and do the research and add that in, but leave the space as I was writing out the stories. And then even, I don't know if you noticed, but the order in which people's stories are told in each section changes. And that's kind of because I would get to, I would get to the end of someone's section and feel like, okay, what naturally kind of flows from there? Like what part of the next person's story picks up the most naturally there. So it was all done in the process of drafting. So as much sort of research and planning and like notes and stuff I had to go off, it was very much a feel kind of process about how it would all link. And then going back, obviously a lot of that stuff gets tightened and cleaned up in editing. And, you know, editors have ideas about areas they want explained a little bit more, because I also wanted to make sure that it, you know, people that don't necessarily understand the terminology or the history or autism advocacy as a sort of area, that they are not locked out of it either. But so just making sure that, you know, my publisher or my editor could say, maybe explain this term a little bit more, or what do you mean by this? And so, yeah, it was kind of worked out as I went.
But like obviously the process of writing this book is different from writing fiction, but in many ways, like even as you described it, like creative nonfiction is by essence it's like piecing together a narrative. Do you find in writing Love and Autism that you had to make different, I guess, accommodations for yourself, as it was like your first foray into, well, aside from your journalism, your first foray into, I guess, a long form nonfiction story? Was it, I guess, difficult for you to?
Yeah, definitely. Like I definitely have never written 70,000 words on a topic before. So it was a challenge, and I read a lot of nonfiction in general, particularly in the sort of disability memoir space. So I had ideas of how I liked things to go and how things I didn't particularly want to do as well. So it was, kind of a leap of faith in a lot of ways, but I had a lot of support from the publisher as well. And even in the type, like the way that it's typeset and the way that the segments are displayed, like that, you know, none of that is on the Word document when you're writing the first draft. So that plays a huge part in the reader experience, I think, as well. So lots of different people that work on making it the end product that it is. But I think it was the unknown. And I think the same when I look back on my first novel versus my second, there was a lot of fear of the unknown the first time around, because I hadn't done it before. And so I feel now like I could do another nonfiction project because I've done it now and I understand the process a lot more.
Yes, please. 50 more. Thank you.
I'll sleep for a year and then I'll wake up and have another go.
That's fair. I'll allow it. Here at Differently Brained, we are huge advocates for our local book industry. We love our Aussie authors, our Aussie publishers, and our Aussie booksellers. And though we do favour the in-store experience of a local indie, we know that isn't always the most accessible way to get your book fix. So we've partnered with Booktopia, the biggest online book retailer in the country, to make sure that when you can't get to the books will come to you. With all the latest releases and old favourites, Booktopia has everything you're looking for. Best of all, they stock all the books by our wonderful podcast guests and even have my little novella too. By purchasing through our link, not only do you support a local author, but also help our little pod too. So next time you're on the hunt for your next read, head to the link in our show notes and grab yourself a little treaty or two. How much did it change from maybe the first pitch or what Penn Macmillan came to you suggesting and then what it is now? Was it always very clear in your head what you wanted it to be, or did it change a little bit?
I think that the people that I interviewed brought so much more to the table than I could have hoped or imagined. I had a lot more to work with and a lot more substance content, I hate the word content, but like a lot more depth. There's a lot more depth to it than I had thought I would have. So the original pitch, I think, was like when we spoke about it with the publisher, they were like, let's talk about relationships. And I was kind of like, well, let's talk about all versions of love, because I'm interested. I'm interested in friendships and how they look for people. I'm interested in the parent-child dynamics. I think that's something that's just not a lot written about autistic parents. It's usually the autism mum or that sort of perspective, which is very soaked in tragedy. So I was really interested in that. And the parent-child relationship between Tim and his mum was just so beautiful and incredible that I couldn't have imagined that in writing a book proposal. That's just something that I was gifted and able to include. So I don't know, other nonfiction, when it's your own life, you have a little bit more of an idea when you're writing a proposal about what's going to be in it. But I look back now and my book proposal was not what the book is now, but it also was like the sort of seeds of this sort of way that I wanted to look at it were there, but I had to have the interviews and the people lined up before I could actually know what it was going to be.
As you were collating the story, even as you were interviewing the people, did you learn anything that maybe changed your perspective on, I guess, the topic of love in all of its forms, but I guess also on experiences of autism?
Yeah.
And also, I guess, did you learn much about anything about yourself in the process as well? Yeah.
Everything, all of the above.
Yeah.
I feel I feel like I am a different person having finished this project than I was at the start.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like each person brought so much. I feel like half of the interviews was kind of me just being like, okay, what did you do about this? Like just getting information on them so that I could be living a more authentic and affirming life. I think I learnt, I can't even begin to think of where to start, but so many things, like even with Jess's story, I think I held on to this idea when I was diagnosed that if I just had been diagnosed as a kid, it would have been so much easier. Life would have been great. That was the tragedy for me, was not having this information earlier. But then, and not that, that wouldn't have been helpful, but Jess had a diagnosis as a child. And so she has this whole other set of challenges that she's gone through because the understanding at a societal, cultural level of autism just wasn't there in the, the 90s or the early 2000s. So there's stigma and there's all this other things that come into play that I guess made me take off the rose-tinted glasses a little bit and understand that the progression that we're seeing now around the understanding of autism is incredible. And it makes me feel so excited about the lay of the land and how things are going to be for my daughter and for all young people moving forward as people get diagnosis and get more information and that kind of thing. But yeah, it just made me reflect a little bit more realistically on the path that we've all been on, or the different paths that we've all been on, and how they've all been difficult in different ways. And that's because of the societal understanding of autism and that sort of medical deficit, tragedy, narrative and approach. Even the way that I look at parents of autistic children who are involved in that sort of autism space and the tragedy, I think talking to these interviewees and talking to some of the other experts that I spoke to really reminded me or taught me that that's a mentality and a space that parents are that's their first understanding of autism. That's how it's presented to them in medical spaces. That's the communities that they're finding themselves in at a time when there's just no support, like having gone through the diagnosis process with my daughter and entering those kinds of spaces, it is presented to you as this hard thing. Even with me being upfront, being like, hey, I'm autistic. I'm really feeling fine and good about this. We just want to go through the process so we can get the support. There's still no avoiding at this current time the language of deficit and all of that.
Well, like as you said in the book, and also when you spoke to us last time, when the medical professional said to you, this is the place where parents cry. Like it's from the start, when in diagnosing your daughter, from the start, it's already framed in that way. Like this is the trajectory that you're going to be on for the rest of your life.
Yeah, even the autistic psychologist Holly that I interviewed, and her talking about the language she has to use on paperwork in order to, particularly around the NDIS or particularly around diagnosis, in order for those people to be able to access those things. Even, that was really eye-opening for me about, even if we have all the right people, it's still the structures there in their present form that need changing.
Yeah, I definitely, I related to all of that, but that one particularly struck with me because we, in the last couple of years, worked to get my mum on the NDIS.
Yeah.
And so we had to do the support letters.
The carer statements, yeah.
The carer statements. And we had to all sit down and have a minor family counseling meeting thing about it, being like, okay, we're going to have to say some like really horrible and crappy shit that doesn't actually reflect who you are as a person, just to make sure that you can get the supports that you actually need, and need to frame it in like, what are you at your worst kind of nonsense language. Like that was how it was framed at us. Like, write your carer statement as though your mum is at her worst. And it was like, well,
or even just framing it as all the things you can't do because of that person. Like that, I remember that with my daughters, and I think she's going to get old. Like your mum's obviously an adult and hopefully was able to, I don't know, does she read that, or does she?
Oh, she read it, and she was like, because we'd had that like family thing beforehand, and she was very clear where she was like, we need this support.
Yeah, that trumps everything. Yeah.
As awful as the framing is, like, this is what you guys need to do, and I'm not taking it personally. Like, it's just the system that we're in. So she was really, really good about it, and she was probably more okay with it than the rest of us were, I think.
I can imagine.
She just understood more than we did the system, because she'd been working on getting NDIS for longer than we'd been kind of in the process. So she'd already come across a lot of that language with like her little team, her medical team.
Yeah.
And like she had a lot of support there of this is the way that the language has to be framed to get you what you need. I'm sorry, kind of thing.
Yeah. I just think I'm terrified of the fact that my daughter will read some of those things, and we've tried, like we have since getting access, I guess it's a little bit easier now. When we get the reports, I will go back if they're not using affirming language in the reports and change it from, like, tweak it just so that it is even within the realm of what you're saying and how, you know, you have to frame it. You can still make minor choices that are more affirming. But yeah, just the idea of needing to compare this disabled person to a non-disabled person and how much harder they are than if they were non-disabled. And when I just don't think that comparison, like, that kind of just goes against the whole, you know, social model of disability, my understanding of neurodiversity. Like it's a big one.
And you touch on in the book all of the things, like there's no point where doctors say to you, these are the challenges that you may face or that your child may face, but these are also the amazing experiences that they're going to have that maybe neurotypical people wouldn't have. Like I absolutely sobbed when you wrote about what you wish doctors had have told you about your daughter, about just the amount of joy and happiness that like a feather will bring her. And that is 100% my favorite part. Like I've written it on a post-it and I put it on my desk because it's just
same.
it's one of the most affirming things I've ever read, and something that just really captured for me what it's like, because there are so many things that autistic people will experience differently, but not all of it is bad. Oh, I'm crying a little bit. It was just such a beautiful thing to read.
Thank you so much. I found that with Chloe's story I loved, and it was Chloe's push to focus on autistic joy as an endpoint for her story, and it was such she's just an incredible advocate, an incredible human being, and she really drove that home, you know, talking about, I think, doing dizzy wizzies is what she called them as a little kid, and like the feeling of like spinning around in circles, and then how as an adult, like going to see her favorite band and taking out her, you know, noise protective earplugs so that she can hear her favorite song and let that sort of wash over her, and that sensory joy and the autistic joy that comes from those experiences really made me more aware of those in my day-to-day as well, which is a massive gift.
It's like when I was reading that about your daughter, I made the note on my post-it note, like in comparison with, I suppose, neurotypical cynicism being ingrained as we get older. It's kind of like when we are discouraged from experiencing very strong feelings of happiness or anything else, and any sort of intense feeling is typically frowned upon, and I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Even as a person who is neurotypical, that doesn't make sense to me. To quash that,
that sort of earnestness or that outward displays of joy. And I think it's so funny because autistic people often both get told that we're like childlike but also old souls. So it's like, I think that sort of encapsulates that people say it's childlike. It's that embracing of feelings in a big way on, or, you know, both sides of that, whether it's the sort of big feelings of happiness. I don't want to say good and bad feelings because it's not, you know, all feelings are just feelings, but yeah, I think that was definitely something that I obviously knew to some extent. And there's so many things that I know and will accept about other people, like my daughter or my autistic friends or other autistic kids I know, but then not give myself the same grace and understanding, because I think I lived so long with the framework that I was doing everything wrong and bad. So it's still unlearning of that and just understanding that there are different ways, different support needs, different challenges, but also different things that I'm good at, and just, having a little bit more grace towards myself about that.
That was another big thing that I took out of this as a reminder, because in my friendships, especially throughout school, I was always too much or too little. So I was either too excited and too bossy or I was snobby and shy and thought I was better than other people. And just getting to that point of like, I don't care. These are my feelings. And I think I was more prone to going to the too shy and holding it all in and not not showing those bigger happy emotions and the excitement and things like that. I was really suppressing that. And I think I'm slowly getting better with it, you know, now that I have a label for it that's not too much or too little. But this was just a really lovely reminder that I would never have said to any of these other people in this book that at any point they were too much or too little. So why do I say it to myself? Like, why did I hold on to that label, and why aren't I comfortable feeling those experiences as fully as I know I can, even when they're going to make me happy because of what other people have said? It was just
that
nice
voice that's that's a beautiful way of putting it.
I hadn't even realized that I'd fully ingrained until I got my label and I started talking to people, and then this was just like kind of the final nail in the coffin of you don't talk to yourself like that, because you wouldn't say that to anyone else. It's
And I definitely feel like parenting has fast-tracked that for me in a way, but then it's a lot easier to have love and empathy and grace for your child than it is for yourself. So doing this and talking it through with adults and like talking back over all of these experiences and realizing that so many of the things that I had thought were me things and me problems, or like I'm the only one that had a hard time with that, all of a sudden you realize that a lot of people in all these different experiences. And I feel like even though I've lived a very different life to all of these people, there were so many moments in every story that just felt so true to my experiences regardless of the difference. So I hope that that's what it is for readers as well, autistic or non-autistic.
How many times did you cry when you read through like the things that the kids sent in?
Every single one.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then I can't remember if I showed them to my partner or showed them to my friend, and just like lots of like crying emojis in the sort of, I just think the kids, like, I just love them so much. I feel like they just get it at a level that even so many adults just don't get it. And the way they explained being autistic, the way they talked about the things and the people they love. I just felt, I probably could have written a whole book on that section, but for now kept it small. I just thought they spoke so eloquently and insightfully about the experience. And so much of the time I find an autistic person just speaking casually about their experiences is going to absolutely nail what that is, so much more than any medical or diagnostic language ever can.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ask your daughter to be in it, or she was like, Mum, I want to be in the book?
Well, I asked her to be in it, but was very casual about it, because like any kind of feeling like you have to do something is immediately a no.
Fair enough.
And so there were lots of kids that I think wanted to be in it, but then like the idea of sitting down and responding to the questions kind of like a demand, which, demand avoidance comes into play there. So it was very much I was trying to play it cool so that she would do it. And I just caught her on a good day at one moment where she was up for answering the questions, and her cousin is in there as well. So I think she loves, and they're really close. So I think she loves that they're both on those pages together, which is really special.
That's so cute. And Shorty the sausage dog got a mention, which is just my absolute favorite. Am I allowed to talk about that message?
For sure. We were talking about that the other day. My daughter, because so many of her favorite people are autistic, and she has now like when she's describing someone that she loves, she'll often say that they're autistic, and so lots of her toys are autistic, including Shorty, the sausage dog, who's actually a puppy corn, because that's very deeply one of the things that we're obsessed with. So yes, Shorty's in the book too.
That's just so precious. That, again, when I got that message, I was like, oh my gosh, that is just so lovely. Because, you know, like you were saying about if you had the rose-tinted glasses, about whether you'd had your diagnosis earlier kind of thing, I was starting to kind of think about that at the start of this year, and then remembered what my high school experience was actually like, and the fact that we did have autistic kids in my year, and autistic was not the word that you used for people that you love, and the bullying was obsessive and horrific. And it was sad because I got to a point where I realized having the label earlier definitely wouldn't have helped me in school, whether it would help me in other areas of my life, because I wouldn't have felt safe. Because it was, like you said, just such a misunderstood and stigmatized area of discussion and things like that. Yeah, so to have a kid out there that's like, Shorty's autistic, is just so wholesome and lovely, which actually brings me to, how do you think the next generation of autistic kids are positioned in terms of pride and identity and going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm careful not to say it's amazing, it's all great, because there are still so many structural things that need to change. There are like so many, whether it's school, whether it's, you know, hospitals and the medical system, whether it's community attitudes. There's a bit of a divide between the sort of affirming community building that we see online and in social, you know, spaces in real life as well. I hate calling not online real life because it's all real life, but in physical spaces, there is amazing community building, but there's also, I just feel like if I was just an autistic adult and I was just engaging with the world in that way and connected with other autistic adults online, I could probably swerve a lot of the stigma and judgment and negativity that is still attached to autism. But having a child and moving through the spaces that way really shows me how far there still is to go. So I think at a structural level, there's a lot of change that is happening and that needs to continue to happen, and hopefully happens at a much quicker pace than it's happening at the moment. And then I think at an individual and community level, I feel really, really inspired by young autistic people and really hopeful about the paths and the lives that they're carving out for themselves and the families that they have surrounding them a lot of the time, and, you know, the friendships that they're able to build, you know, even that there are just like autistic only Minecraft servers for kids, and there's so many more spaces that are accepting and affirming and connecting of community, because I feel like getting to spend time with other autistic people is one of the best parts of being autistic, and that freedom and that connection goes a long way to counter a lot of the other not so positive stuff. So yeah, I feel hopeful about it, but definitely not like we're there yet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that's a big thing for me. Not having a child, I can avoid a lot of those spaces. And so, you know, I make sure that I'm still talking to people like yourself and other parents and things, and doing the looking into that I need to do to remember that it's not like in like a safe way, just to have an awareness of what it still is like completely, and in the institutional areas of it, because I do get such a curated and affirming experience that I obviously don't want to become not attuned to the more difficult stuff that's outside our control that is still happening in society, because those are ultimately the things that we need to change and that I'd like to help change.
Yeah. And I think a lot of autism and wider disability advocates do such incredible work in those spaces, and it's really challenging work because, you know, so much of what is said about autism is met with that, you know, is everybody autistic these days, kind of like it's a fad, or it's grown into a popular thing to be. But the reality of living as an autistic person is there are more challenges there than people who might only see the positive posts on social media would understand.
Yeah, for sure. People aren't running out and doing the whole diagnostic process because it's trendy on TikTok. Like,
yeah, exactly. That's a more succinct version of what I was trying to say.
No, because and that was one of my big worries when I started looking into it, was that I started looking on social media and then I was like, is it confirmation bias? Am I just thinking that I'm autistic because I'm seeing social media posts and that I'm looking for not just the challenges but also the affirming kind of stuff? And that was a really hard part of, is my brain just wired to follow a trend or am I actually? Turns out I am actually, don't worry.
Yeah. I think how do we jump straight from stigmatized understanding of autism to, oh, everybody thinks they're autistic nowadays. And like, where was the acceptance part in the middle? Like we, as a society, there's this jump into like scoffing or scorning, having sort of skepticism around people's diagnosis. And it's like, you skip the whole part where you can accept other people's reality and what they're telling you about themselves. They wouldn't, like the psychologist said in the interview, he's yet to meet somebody that's come in with this self-diagnosis or self-understanding of autism who's been wrong. And I found that really validating. Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. Like, most of us do go in with our research done.
Because our binder's full of information. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Like I have a full Word document that was just titled, Am I Autistic? And it was just every part that I was like, I saw this like in one resource. Yes, I do that. And when I talked to my psych at the end, she was like, yeah, no, like, we obviously had to do the whole thing, but not many people who aren't autistic come in with that level of understanding, self-awareness, preparedness to be like, here's all my things. What do you think?
Yeah, I have collected all this information. Yeah.
Which I loved the Notes app. I loved the Notes app bits in the book as well because, I definitely have just the most insane notes on my phone about like, this.
And they're usually at like 2 a.m. or like 11 p.m. when those thoughts are being processed for me anyway. It's usually an obscure hour. But I thought so much around that self-processing is questioning and doubting, and that's why I wanted to include my own Notes app, which I still can't even in the editing process, I'm like, I won't read those pages again. I don't need to read that again.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it is that self-awareness and processing and dissecting and investigating that happens at such a deep level that I think when I was originally telling people, I was probably telling more people than I needed to about my autism diagnosis. And I think that there was not that understanding from other people about the depth of research and self-understanding that I had come to before I was brave enough to tell somebody. It wasn't like a fleeting thought that passed my mind. There was a lot more to it. So I think I was trying to, depict that to an extent with my Notes app section.
Jacinta's got a note written here, which I'm going to poach because I agree with it. It's about so the representation and the wider representation in the book. You could have just written typically about straight white male voices, but there's like an entire diverse range of voices here, including Tim's story, who is non-speaking, uses partner-assisted typing to communicate. Jacinta's written here, but she didn't really have a question, but more of like a throw out that you're showcasing all of these different voices, and even though Tim can't speak, he's still able to share his story. And one thing for me, I really liked reading Noah's story because she's got bipolar disorder, and I was able to relate a lot to her kind of struggle with coming to terms with that. And also Jess's story, I don't see a lot of people mentioning trichotillomania ever. And I saw that, I'm like, oh, it's a fellow trick sufferer, yay. And so obviously autism is the framing device, but all of the other additional things as well, and the diversity involved. I personally appreciated.
Oh, well, thank you. I think that was kind of the point for me in a lot of ways, because the diagnostic criteria is so originally based on young white boys, that framework, even if people don't really understand that that's still what they understand as autism, it is still this narrow set of behavioral outward, characteristics that they understand to be autism. But the flip side of that is that they don't or can't understand that there are other presentations. So wanting to talk to a wide range of people with a wide range of experiences was one of the main goals that I set out with in sharing the multiple stories, in weaving the different stories. And also because it was really interesting and insightful for me to hear and learn about all of these other different experiences, whether that's with religion. There's a couple of experiences there with different cultures, even just Chloe's living like rurally and regionally, and her experiences with that differ to my experiences. So so much of it was just the natural interest that I had in learning about lives that looked different to mine, but also had this connection.
Which is very much a jumping point from, that's why we wanted to do this podcast as well. So you lead me straight into the note that I actually had that Lachlan stole, was that even if you are non-speaking or selectively mute, or you just don't want to hear yourself on our podcast, please don't think that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you, and we will move hell and high water to share your story on the podcast. We will find a way, because we want to share a variety of experiences. We want to have different people of different cultures and different backgrounds on, and we will do what we can. If it's something that you're interested in and you feel like you haven't seen your story on the podcast, please reach out. I'm going to put you on the spot, and I don't think you're going to love it, but why should readers read the book, Kay?
I should have an answer to this because I said so. No, I hope that people pick it up to enjoy a good read. That's my starting point for any book. It can't be about education or understanding or acceptance or any of those things if people aren't going to enjoy reading it. So that's my starting point. And then I think for autistic readers, I hope that they feel celebrated and accepted and feel connected to the other stories. I hope everybody feels connected to all of the stories. But then for non-autistic readers, some of the stats and things that I share in the book are quite heavy, quite grim. The state of play, things around mental health, loneliness, bullying, even suicidality for autistic people and particularly young people. And a lot of that research that I was looking into, a lot of the time protective factors, along with more structural support, more funding, more of that side of things. The other side of it was more acceptance. It was just people are less likely to suffer in these areas if there is more acceptance. And that was so clear and so simple. And it's still something that people don't seem to be able to do at a really fundamental level. I think just some people are really still stuck in that idea of this thing that you're saying is hard for you isn't hard for me, therefore it can't be hard. And the not having a perception that there are other ways of moving through the world and experiencing the world. So I hope that, at a very simple level, it just maybe broadens perspectives on the different ways of moving through the world. And with that understanding, hopefully comes acceptance and then celebration and all those other things afterwards.
Oh, that's so nice. It really is, though. I would agree that I felt all of that. I almost started rereading it immediately after I finished it, just to feel all of it again. And the only reason I didn't is because I put it into my partner's hands and was like, there's a relationship in here that you are going to really relate to. Check this out, because I think Chloe's story is it was probably the one that I related to closest in terms of where she lived and things like that. And then also her relationship very much parallels my relationship. My partner is not diagnosed, but I'm not convinced that there's not something there.
I love
we just link too easily that the communication is not neurotypical. It just cannot be.
Yeah. Oh, we're on that path too in this household, so I totally get it. But I just loved Chloe and Jacob's stories so much, so much. They taught me so much about not bringing neurotypical expectations into a neurodivergent relationship and feel like doing what feels right for you know, the people in the relationship, as opposed to what society tells you should be done. I just found so much to love and learn from their story, and I was so grateful for them for sharing it and being so open.
There were so many little bits that stuck out as well, like when she's talking about trying to watch something and Jacob has to fix the internet, and so she's yelling out, "Can you fix it? Like, what are you doing?" And like the friends being like, "Oh, that's like a bit," that is 100% my household, where I definitely look like I'm like whipping Lucas around the house.
Oh, people are not used to direct
direction
communication.
No, and like he appreciates the directness because that's how we engage. And if I'm gonna like wander around and not tell him what I really mean, it's just going to get stressful for both of us. The vibes are going to be off. We're both going to feel that the other person doesn't feel good but not know why. Yeah. Like, it was really nice to see that direct communication and have someone else, you know, talk about, "Oh, weird, my friends think it's a bit different or strange, or I'm a bit bossy, but like, this is just how we work." And I'm like, yes.
Yeah. And I think that so much, even with Nora's parenting as well, so much of her stories around that, like, this is what works for us. Sometimes it's, you know, it's a safe day and it's staying at home and it's being on the iPads and it's having snacks in the air conditioning because it's too hot or too hard to go out. You know, there's still that level of parenting judgment that comes from screen time, or that comes from, you know, not doing all these external things that you think you need to be doing. But then the reality of having, you know, autistic or neurodivergent kids is that, are those things going to be things that they're going to enjoy, or are they just things that you've brought from the outside world expectation-wise and placed on them, and what actually brings them joy? And yeah, I think that's kind of what I learned on a lot of different levels.
I love this book. Outside of your own wonderful books, so this one and your 2 fiction books, what are the best representations or explorations of love, autism, and relationships that you've found?
So many. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Really?
Well, no. Like, I just mean there's so many authors that I want to say that I can't think of where to start. So I think, like I said, Late Bloomer, Clem Basso, and Chloe Hayden's book, Different Not Less, are incredible in terms of the memoir space. Tim, who has been interviewed for my book, has also written a book with his mum called Back from the Brink, which is incredible. And it's both of their voices interchanging. It's like, it's really, really, again, delves into their own interests and their own research, their own backstory. So I definitely would recommend that. In terms of love, I think the writers that I interviewed for the autistic writers on autism section are just my favorite writers on love and autism. So that's Anna Waitley, Jen Wild, Helen Huang, all write so beautifully in that space. And then I think there are other authors as well. Kate Foster writes more in the middle grade space and writes beautiful books for all kids, but just me having a child and being in the kidlit space, I treasure her stories so much. I'm trying to think of where else. I think one of the sort of heavier, more research-based books that I read and cited was We're Not Broken, which is by Eric Garcia. He's a US-based autistic journalist, and he really delved into the history of autism advocacy, how we've ended up where we are now, and just so much context for all of the, you know, the way things are, but how and the why. And his book's, invaluable in that way, and something that I refer to really, really often. And anytime I'm sort of looking at pitching something in the nonfiction space, I'd say that I would look at his book, because it just contextualizes so much, and it's a chunky book and it's lots of research, and it's definitely worth a read for anybody that's into that side of things. I think that's all.
That's a wonderful list. And there's also obviously all of the resources in the back of Love and Autism, as well as.
It was nice to be able to include the list so that I didn't forget, because I think if I'm asked on the spot, I'll go away after this chat and be like, oh, I didn't mention this person and this person. But being able to include a list means that I could take my time and make sure that I included all of the stories I wanted to include. So that was good.
Excellent.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Oh, thank you both.
I've really appreciated it, as always. We love having you on. I thought I wasn't going to cry this time, and I did.
Thank you so much.
Both times.
It's all right. I cry a lot all the time. I don't even know how I'm going to get through like the promotion of this book without crying, but I suppose that'll be part of it.
You didn't cry today.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's like when there's tiredness involved, the crying happens more easily. So thank you so much for the space and the time to talk specifically about this project and about the incredible people that are involved in the project, because it wouldn't exist without them. So I'm really appreciative of that time. Thank you.
And thank you for writing it above all. Honestly, it is a fantastic resource to have for anyone. The descriptions at the beginning of a terminology, I know that I have, and I probably did slip up today with the terminology, but that even having that as a resource for someone to refer back to is invaluable. Aside from, the wonderful stories that these people have told, it's yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I didn't catch you slipping up on any terminology, and I'm usually a big corrector in the moment. Like, just my brain's like just corrects people, and I don't even mean to. So I didn't do that. So I think you did good. I think having an explainer, I think putting everybody on the same page and explaining that like different people have different ways in which they want to be referred. Some around the language around autism, because it can be a hot topic, and people can unknowingly misstep and then be shot down, and then it's just tricky. So I find if there's a bit of an explainer, that's a nice place to start with everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
I love how often our raps end up in more discussion.
Long-winded. I can never say goodbye. I'm really, really bad at saying goodbye to people. We always end up having long tangent talks.
It's Lachlan every time.
It's Lachlan hang up on me today. That might be the best way to handle it.
You know how they say when you're writing an essay that you shouldn't bring up new points in the conclusion of the essay? I say, bugger that. You have to.
Side notes in the conclusions. Yeah.
Yes.
Kay's book, Love Autism, is out now. You'll find a link to go and buy it in our show notes, as well as her two beautiful first and second book, as well as her website and everything else, Kay, because we're obsessed. If you'd like to support our podcast, share it with friends. We're on Instagram. Rate us, review us, love us, please. We need validation.
Well,
that's about all.
I don't know if I need validation. I'm kind of pretty famous.
Not all of us need validation.
Just looking at the download ratios that we've received so far, I'm kind of a big deal. So you're welcome.
Differently Brained shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently Brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.